Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Zachor speaking to you from south of Jerusalem here in the holy and beautiful land of Israel. Today is the 9th day of Adar Sheni, second Adar. The year is 5784. It's March 19th, 2024. This coming Shabbat, we begin the book of Leviticus, parashat Vayikra, and he called. And Parashat Vayikra begins in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 1, concludes chapter 5, verse 6. But before we get to Shabbat, we have a very busy end of the week, because this coming Thursday, 2 days from now, is Ta'anit Esther, the fast of Esther, which is pushed forward this year because Ta'anit Esther occurs on the 13th of Adar. But this year, the 13th of Adar is on a Shabbat, and we don't fast on Shabbat. So the fast is pushed forward 2 days, because we don't want to fast also Erev Shabbat, on the eve of Shabbat, and go into Shabbat hungry. So we push the fast forward 2 days. So on Thursday, beginning Thursday morning, because it's a morning to evening fast, it's not a 25-hour fast, it's a dawn to dark fast. We fast the fast of Esther, which Esther herself, Malkat Esther, the Queen Esther herself, called for that fast. She called upon the Jews of Paras of Persia to fast on that day on her benefit, on her behalf, so that when she went before the king Ahasuerus to speak to him about this decree that the Jews of Persia would all be annihilated. She wanted the people of the Judeans, right? They were called Jews. The first book in the Torah, in which Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, sometimes known as the Hebrews, sometimes known as the Israelites, people of Israel, first time they're called. But here in the book of Esther, it's the first time they're called Jews, and that's because they are Judeans, because these were the Jews that were exiled by the Babylonians into Babylon, and Babylon was then, of course, later conquered by the Persians. And of course, the story of Esther and the story of Purim takes place in Persia, ancient Persia. And of course, the first Persian king, Cyrus, in Hebrew Koresh, was a wonderful king to the Jews, and he allowed the Jews to return to Judea, to Jerusalem, and to rebuild the Holy Temple. But there are still many Jews in the now Persian Empire, and that's the story of that takes place in Esther, and those Judeans are now called Jews. To this day, we are referred to commonly as Jews because the 10 northern tribes were scattered. They were conquered first. Northern kingdom of Israel was conquered before Judea was, and those exiles were scattered all throughout the Middle East and even into the Far East, and they are known as the lost tribes. Some have reappeared in modern time. The Ethiopian Jews from the tribe of Dan, and there's the Bnei Menashe, from northeastern India, from the tribe of Menashe, and who knows who else. There's all Jewish communities scattered all through Africa and the Far East, and many of them are just being rediscovered by the rest of the world, the rest of the Jewish world, and trying to find out how they got there and what the source is. But that's another story for another day. Point is that, yes, the Jews of Judea are the vast majority of the known Jews, and the Jews of known origin today are Judeans, if they're not Kohanim, right? We have Kohanim from the tribe of Levi. And also in the Judean kingdom was the tribe of Benjamin, because the tribe of Benjamin, their inheritance of land was just north of Jerusalem. And in fact, the Temple Mount, part of it is in Benjamin and part of it is in Judah. So I'm really getting off on a tangent here. My point is that the fast of Esther takes place this year on Thursday, and Purim itself begins Motzei Shabbat, that is Saturday evening after the conclusion of Shabbat, when we hear the reading of the Megillah, and we hear it again the following day. And then on Sunday evening, Monday, is Shushan Purim, the 15th of Adar, and that's when Shushan is celebrated in walled cities that were walled at the time of the story of Purim. And the one walled city that we know for a fact that was walled then was Jerusalem. So Jerusalem at Purim is celebrated one day after it's celebrated in the rest of the world. I saw a fascinating video on this subject, and I'm going to share it on our Facebook page later this week. It's a bit of a long video, teaching, but it's about 15 minutes. But it's fascinating and so relevant to our times today. I highly recommend that you watch it to the very end. So, what's this all about? Purim is about the victory of the Jews against our enemies that wanted to destroy us. Wow. Does this sound like a recurring theme in our history? You bet it does. And yeah, it's really relevant. And again, the same evil empire that wanted to destroy us back then, the Persians, are the ones behind the war today. The Iranians. Iranians are the Persians. And in the time of Esther, it was the king Ahasuerus, who was a very weak king, it seemed, and vacillated between this and that, but he had a very evil advisor named Haman, a name not so different from the name of what's he called, the supreme leader, Khomeini, right? History really does repeat. It really does return. It really does echo through the ages. It's pretty eerie. And so you can bet that Purim this year is really going to have a lot of potent meaning for Jews around the world. And just as Haman said, this is a people who are they're disunited, and they're spread out through the kingdom, and they're not together. They're an easy mark. So too did Hamas figure that Israel, which was in the grips of tremendous internal division and unrest and instability politically, they saw this as a perfect time. So let's attack them on their holiest day of the year, on a Shabbat, and on the holy festival of Simchat Torah. Let's attack them then. And they did. But what they did, in effect, was cause Israel to unite, just like they did in Persia, and to fight back, just like we did in Persia. And just as we decimated our enemies in Persia, so too today, God willing, we will completely decimate our enemies in Gaza, and let's hope elsewhere in the north as well, against Hezbollah and against Iran eventually, ultimately, because they are the evil people, the evil government, not the people of Iran. People of Iran seem to be, by and large, very friendly toward Israel, but the regime there, the Islamic fundamentalist revolutionary regime, which is trying to impose their tyranny throughout the entire region, throughout the entire world. If the world would wake up before it's too late, it might not happen. We have to defeat them completely. That's what is known as defeating Amalek. And where does Amalek come into this? Okay, so this week also on Shabbat, it's Shabbat. Not only is it Shabbat parashat Vayikra, which we haven't even begun to talk about, and it's a fascinating book, Leviticus, a fascinating parsha, and maybe we'll have time in this episode of Temple Talk to talk about Vayikra, but I really want to focus right now, as we have been, on Purim, And let's right now parashat Zachor. So this Shabbat is also known as Shabbat Zachor, which means remember. And on this Shabbat, we also read, in addition to the reading of Vayikra, we read 3 verses that everyone, every adult, man and woman, is obliged to hear. And they are from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25, verses 17 through 19. As we know, Amalek first ambushed Israel in the wilderness just weeks after Israel left Egypt. And they did so without warning, they did so without reason, and they did so in an attempt to destroy Israel. And Israel was able to fight back. As we recall, Joshua led the battle, and Moshe stood up on a nearby hilltop and held up his arms toward the heavens. And as the people looked up and saw him gesturing toward heavens, they remembered that God is on their side. God is with Israel. God fights for Israel, and they were strengthened. And when they looked up and were reminded, they were able to pursue Amalek. If they forgot and didn't look up, then Amalek grew stronger. In the end, Israel defeated Amalek and was given the commandment to always be prepared and always fight Amalek, because Amalek represents just unadulterated evil, just the unbridled, irrational hatred of the nation of Israel, hatred of the Jewish people. That's Amalek. And every generation there's an Amalek that tries to destroy us. And so we need, our commandment is that we need to destroy Amalek. And that is exactly what Israel is doing right today. And God willing, we will not let up until we have destroyed Amalek. Let's read those 3 verses from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25, verses 17 through 19, that we're going to read on Shabbat. And you know what? I'm going to read them in Hebrew and then in English. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek baderech b'tzeitechem mimitzrayim asher kocha baderech vayizanev b'cha kol hanechashlim acharecha v'ata ayef v'yagea v'lo yareh Elohim v'haya b'haniach Hashem Elokecha lecha l'chol oyevecha misaviv be'eretz asher Hashem Elohecha noten lecha nachala l'rishta Timche et zecher Amalek, mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. You shall remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you went out of Egypt, how he happened upon you on the way and cut off all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it will be when Hashem your God grants you the respite from all your enemies around you in the land which Hashem your God gives to you as an inheritance to possess, that you shall obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens. You shall not forget. So the 3 verses begin with the word Zachor, remember, as a commandment, an imperative, and closes with Lo tishkach, do not forget. And we haven't forgotten all these years. We have a historical memory, our people, and it's not simply remembering an ancient fact from thousands of years ago. It's remembering in our souls and our bones and our flesh what it is. We have been pursued and persecuted by many Amaleks, and on October 7th, when Amalek struck again, it struck a very, very deep nerve in the entire nation of Israel and in Jews around the world. Yes, we remember. We remember. It hasn't been that long since Amalek tried to destroy Israel in the Holocaust. And it hasn't been that long since previous to the Holocaust, pogroms in Europe where tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands of Jews were slaughtered with no ability to to fight back with no place to go but to run, to flee, and to hope that somewhere someone will take you in. But no, today Israel has the ability to fight back, and that's what we're doing. We don't forget these things. And we will not allow ourselves to be terrorized by bloodthirsty monsters. And we have this obligation. Hashem is counting on us to fulfill this obligation. Historically, we have always come close. Obviously, we have not completely succeeded. The most famous story is what we read this Shabbat also, the Haftarah, which is from the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 15. And of course, that's the story of the war that Samuel, that Saul, the first king of Israel, led against Amalek. And of course, he was commanded to destroy completely, but he had pity on the king Agag of Amalek, and also on some of their livestock, and so he didn't kill them all. And this was the last straw as far as the prophet Samuel was concerned. He said, because you didn't do what Hashem told you to do, your obligation as king, you're not going to be king any longer. It will go to someone else. And Samuel himself picked up a sword and cut Agag, the head of the Amalekites, to pieces. But so again, will Israel, repel all the pressure, diplomatic pressure, political pressure, military pressure from the entire world to stop short of destroying Hamas, to not go into the most southern stronghold and final stronghold of Hamas, Rafiah, in the border between Gaza and Egypt. And the Biden administration, which is just repulsive the way they're behaving. They basically seem to be determined to save Hamas from destruction in order to somehow save Biden's chances of getting reelected. That seems to be the political math involved in it. Let's just throw Israel under the bus so that we can get reelected. I'm not so sure that's going to work. But Netanyahu has been saying that nothing's going to stop us from going into Rafiah and finishing the job. Let's see if that really happens. It hasn't happened yet. God willing, it will happen. It needs to happen. We cannot allow ourselves to be terrorized. We cannot allow our other enemies all around us, to see that we wavered. This is what we refer to here in Israel as an existential war. It's a war for our survival. We have no option other than to win it, and to win it decisively. And anything less than that will leave us imperiled and will just lead to the next war. Better to get the job done now. And we're also told in the book of Deuteronomy that once we have actually eliminated our enemies, then the next move is building the Holy Temple. So we could be on the brink of something really big if we have the courage and follow through and do not allow the world to deter us from doing what we need to do. Zachor, it's a very powerful concept to remember and not to forget, and to obliterate their memory, the memory of Amalek, from under the heavens, right? That's an interesting, to remember to obliterate their memory. We have to remember to destroy them to the point where nobody will remember them because they don't exist anymore. They don't pose a threat anymore. That is the goal. And of course, simply eliminating Hamas, it will not be the end of Amalek. We know that. But it could be the beginning of the end of Amalek on our southern border, on our southern western border, which would be a very good start. Concerning Purim, it was, there's just so much to talk about it. We'll be writing about it and posting about it later in the week. But, it was, took place outside of the land of Israel. And It involved a diaspora community that was on its way to assimilation. The whole opening of the book of Esther, the scroll of Esther, is at a big feast that Ahasuerus has. It was a half a year long feast, and everybody's invited, including the Jews. They even had, kosher food for them. Our midrash tells us, so they'd feel comfortable. But what was brought out? What was the food served in? Vessels from the Holy Temple, vessels that had been captured and stolen by the Babylonians, and then they fell into the possession of the Persians. And this is what he was celebrating. He was celebrating that according to his mathematical calculations, the prophecy of Jeremiah that the Jews would return after a period of some 50 years to Israel, according to his math, that period was just coming to an end. And so he was going to celebrate the end of the Jewish entity, the end of Jews, with this big feast. And to really show what he was thinking, he brought out these vessels and had the food served in it. And so any Jew that attended that feast was quite guilty of betraying their heritage, betraying their God. Even though the food was kosher and they were made to feel at home, they were on the wrong side of history, my friends. And of course, the great resistor, the unconscientious objector to the whole thing and to bowing down before Haman was Mordechai, the uncle of Esther. And between Mordechai and Esther, they were able to discover the plot of Haman to have all the Jews killed and to have it overturned, and to preside over the death by hanging of Haman and his 10 sons, and over the ability of the Jews to fight back and utterly defeat those who sought to annihilate them. And yes, we celebrate that. Some people say, oh, you celebrate such a bloody thing, a bloody victory. What's interesting is that we're told that the battles took place on the 13th of Adar, 12th and 13th, I believe, but we don't celebrate until the 14th. What do we celebrate? We're not celebrating the war. We're celebrating the peace that happened after it. Yes, sometimes you have to have war to have peace. Yes, sometimes Israel is compelled to destroy our enemies, to kill our enemies, to annihilate our enemies. Yes, and that's what we're doing today. And some people say, oh, that's so horrible. How can you kill people? Sorry, folks. We were attacked by Amalek, and this is how it goes. Okay, so if you have any complaints, send them to Hamas, which I know you won't do, because you either fear Hamas, or you admire Hamas, or you accept all their lies, or you simply detest the Jews, detest the state of Israel, the people of Israel, the God of Israel. But all you who side with Israel and side with the God of Israel and side with the truth and understand the truth of the Torah and the constant revelation of prophecy in our time, I think you know on which side to stand with and who to trust. And we trust the God of Israel. So let us now move on to parashat Vayikra. As we know, we concluded the book of Exodus last week with parashat Pekudei, and it concluded beautifully, majestically with the building of the tabernacle. It was all the parts of it were constructed by the entire nation of Israel, and Moshe was instructed by Hashem to assemble it, and so he assembled it. In fact, we're told that he assembled it and disassembled it once each day for a period of 7 days, and it was on the 8th day, which was the first of the month of Nisan, which is coming up in a few weeks, that it was assembled again for the final time, and the opening and dedication took place, and we'll be reading about that in Parashat Shmini in just 2 weeks' time. Shmini being the eighth day after the 7 days of Moshe assembling and disassembling, and also the 7 days of practice, dry runs by the Kohanim, by the priests, so they can understand what was be expected of them. But as we concluded last week's reading, which, as we talked about, so much seemed to echo in its language and what was happening, the conclusion of the 6 days of creation, which we read about all the way back in the beginning of the book of Genesis, Bereshit, and how Moshe put together the tabernacle, and we read in chapter 39, verse 42, like everything that Hashem commanded Moshe, so did the children of Israel perform all the labor. Moshe saw the entire work, and behold, they had done it as Hashem had commanded, so had they done, and Moshe blessed them. Okay, that in other verses so much are reminiscent of the conclusion of the 6 days and the Shabbat that followed at the very beginning of time. But moving further on in Kudei, just a few verses further, after Moshe put together the tabernacle and placed all the vessels where they belonged, it says in the final verses, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Hashem filled the tabernacle. Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting, for the cloud rested upon it, and the glory of Hashem filled the tabernacle. And then it talks about how when the cloud would raise up, Israel would go on its journey. And when the cloud would come down, Israel would stop and set up camp. But what we're focusing on here is the fact that Hashem's glory, the Anan, the cloud, what's later known in later times referred to as the Shekhinah, God's presence in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, was so manifest and so, let's say, tangible in a spiritual way that Moshe could not enter, right? Moshe could not enter. If Moshe could not enter, obviously the Kohanim could not enter, and enter they needed to do in order to perform their tasks inside the tabernacle. And Moshe would need to meet with Hashem inside the tabernacle in order to communicate with Hashem. So what's going on here? A similar situation happened that we read corresponds to the dedication of the tabernacle. When we read the dedication of the first temple by King Solomon in the book of Kings, it also says that a thick cloud filled the temple and the Kohanim could not go inside. So here we are beginning Parshat Vayikra, and Vayikra is also known by our sages as Torat HaKohanim, the teaching of the Kohanim, the temple priests, because so much in the book of Leviticus is about what happens inside the tabernacle / Mikdash temple, what the responsibilities are of the Kohanim, the different types of offerings that to be made. And not only, however, there are also tasks and responsibilities that the Kohanim have outside of the tabernacle, and there are also some other stories and events that happen throughout Leviticus that don't necessarily have to do with the tabernacle, and there are also commandments that Israel receives that don't necessarily have to do with the tabernacle, but much of Leviticus is in fact focused on the service of the Kohanim in the tabernacle. So it has gotten the name of Torat HaKohanim, the teaching of the Kohanim. But to answer our question, what happens? Moshe can't get in the tabernacle. What's going to happen now? So we begin in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, and we read the first verse, Vayikra el Moshe, Vayedaber Hashem elav, me'ohel moed lemor. Okay? He called to Moshe And Hashem spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, okay, that's the entire first verse. The second verse, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when a man among you brings an offering to Hashem from animals, from the cattle, or from the flock, shall you bring your offering. But let's focus on the first verse, which is very mysterious. He called to Moshe. In fact, in Hebrew, it's one word, vayikra. There's no he, there's no pronoun, I guess you would call that. It's just, it's one word in Hebrew, vayikra. Right, so Hashem he's not named. It's important. And also, that last letter of Vayikra is an aleph. And it's always written in the Sefer Torah and in many printed versions of the Torah. It's a small aleph. It's a very small aleph, smaller than all the other letters. Aleph, which can stand for Ani, me. It can also stand for Elohim, God. It's made small. God is, first of all, when the verse opens, God is not called by name. Usually Hashem speaks to Moshe. Now it's just he speaks to Moshe. He called to Moshe. And he made himself small. What does that mean? God diminished, as it were, his presence inside the tabernacle so that Moshe could enter in. Just as Israel had cleared space from its domain, right, its encampment, earth, man's domain, had cleared a space, had evacuated a space so that Hashem could enter his presence into the tabernacle. And now Hashem is returning the favor. And of course, this is how Hashem created the world. Hashem fills all existence and beyond. So how can Hashem create a space that's not completely Hashem? Hashem had to create a hollow, as it were, within his being so that he could then fill it with creation and then ultimately fill it with his presence. So this is known in Hebrew as tzimtzum, as to self-diminish. And one way that we self-diminish is simply through modesty, through understanding that we're not the only player on earth, we're not the only player in creation, that there are other people, and there is a God. And in order to let anybody in, and especially and certainly to let Hashem in, we need to always create a hollow, create a space to let them in. We can't always be imposing ourselves, our reality on everyone else. We have to let others in. And so that's what's happening, and we see it happening through the way in Hebrew it's so beautifully presented. Again, Hashem opens without being designated by name. The aleph of Ani, me, or the aleph of Elohim, God, is made small, giving a sign to us that Hashem is diminishing his presence inside the tabernacle to allow for man to enter, to allow for Moshe to enter. Only in the second half of the verse does it say Hashem, right? Vayedaber Hashem elav me'ol moed lemor, right? So here is the secret to how Moshe is able to actually, and after him the Kohanim, the temple priests, actually enter into the tabernacle after what we read last week, that Hashem's presence made it impossible for anybody to enter in. And that's how the book of Vayikra opens. This first parashat, this first reading is very focused on offerings. We'll be talking about that over the next few weeks, but we're about to come to a conclusion here. So I want to wish everybody, first of all, a good fast on Thursday and a very happy Purim, and be sure to listen to parashat Zachor on Shabbat, and let's do it. Let's destroy Amalek. Let's obliterate his memory forever from the earth. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.